People think suburbs are quiet, they're wrong. They're quiet the way a courtroom is quiet, tense, judgmental, and always one wrong move away from chaos that I moved into Maplewood Ridge believing it would be peaceful. Fresh lawns, identical mailboxes, kids riding bikes, and neighbors who waved with forced smiles. It was the kind of place real estate agents described as safe, family-oriented, and well-managed. That last part should have been my warning. The HOA ruled everything. Grass couldn't be more than 2 inches tall. Trash bins had to be hidden by sunset. Curtains had to be neutral in tone. Even the shade of beige your house was painted had to be approved. And at the center of it all was Linda Haversham. Everyone called her Karen, but never to her face. Linda was the HOA president, self-appointed queen of Maplewood Ridge. Mid-50s, bleach blonde bob, permanent scowl, and a voice that could curdle milk. She drove a white SUV plastered with HOA stickers and walked around with a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her favorite phrase? "I'll be reporting this." She reported everyone, including me. I'd been living there barely 3 weeks when I found the notice taped to my front door. HOA violation. Unauthorized hose use. I laughed out loud. Unauthorized hose use? I had watered my lawn. Once. For 15 minutes. I walked straight to the HOA office, a tiny converted garage near the entrance of the neighborhood. Linda was inside, sipping coffee like she owned the world. "Can I help you?" she said without looking up. "I got this notice," I said, holding it out. "It says unauthorized hose use." She finally looked at me, eyes sharp. "Yes. You watered outside approved hours. Approved hours end at 6. By 10 minutes. She smiled. A thin, cruel smile. Rules are rules. That was my first lesson. Linda lived 3 houses down from me. Big corner lot. Perfect lawn. And a massive in-ground pool. That pool was her pride. Every summer, she threw loud HOA-approved community gatherings that were somehow invite-only. Music blasted. Laughter echoed. Her friends floated in the pool drinking wine while the rest of us listened through closed windows. What I didn't notice at first, but later realized, was her hose. It ran along the side of my house. At first, I assumed it was a coincidence. Maybe she had her own spigot on that side. But one morning, while checking my mailbox, I heard water running. A lot of water. I followed the sound. The hose was connected to my outdoor faucet, and it was running straight into Linda's pool. I knocked on her door. "Linda, your hose is connected to my water." She didn't even blink. "Oh, yes. Mine wasn't working. That's my water bill." She waved her hand. "It's temporary." "For how long?" "Until the pool's full." I stared past her shoulder. The pool was enormous. That could take days. She shrugged. "We all have to make small sacrifices for community harmony." Then she closed the door. I stood there, stunned. The next month, my water bill arrived. It was 4 times higher than usual. I marched back to the HOA office. "This is because of Linda's pool," I said. "She used my water without permission." Linda looked offended. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a fact." She leaned back in her chair. "You should have reported it through proper channels." "I came to you." She smiled again. "And I see no violation. So, I just pay for her pool?" She tapped her clipboard. "Unless you can prove misuse." I felt something crack inside me. I disconnected the hose. The next day, it was reconnected. I locked my faucet. 2 days later, I got another HOA notice. I couldn't believe it. I went door to door asking neighbors if they'd experienced anything like this. They all had stories. Fines for chalk on driveways. Warnings for unapproved flower colors. One man had been forced to remove a bird feeder because it encouraged non-native species. Everyone was afraid of Linda. "She'll make your life hell," one neighbor whispered. Too late. I snapped. I shut off the main valve to my house and sat at the kitchen table, shaking with rage. My phone buzzed with an email notification. That's when I realized something. Linda didn't see me as a neighbor. She saw me as a resource. And she wasn't going to stop. So, I decided to stop playing nice. Revenge fantasies come easy when you're exhausted and angry. Most people never act on them. But that night, sitting in the dark, listening to water I was paying for, something in me hardened. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I didn't want to break the law. I just wanted the truth to surface in a way Linda couldn't spin. I started documenting everything. Photos, videos, dates, bills. And I remembered something important about Maplewood Ridge. The HOA controlled appearances. But they didn't control infrastructure. And Linda had made one critical mistake. She assumed I was powerless. There's something sobering about realizing you're being bullied by someone who smiles while doing it. The next morning, Linda waved at me like nothing had happened. She stood in her driveway, yoga pants spotless, coffee mug in hand, smiling that tight HOA smile as I backed out for work. The hose was gone. No water noise. No sign anything had happened at all. That was her favorite tactic. Create chaos. Then erase the evidence. I decided that from that moment on, nothing would happen without a record. I installed a small outdoor security camera. Nothing fancy. Just enough to capture the side yard and the faucet. I checked local laws first. Fully legal. Private property, no audio. I also started keeping a journal. Date. Time. What happened? Who was involved? At first, it felt dramatic. Like I was overreacting. Then the footage started piling up. Linda reconnecting the hose. Linda checking the connection. Linda pretending not to notice the camera. She did it confidently, like someone who had never faced consequences in her life. Monthly HOA meetings were mandatory for transparency, though transparency apparently didn't include dissent. The meeting room was packed. Folding chairs. Coffee in styrofoam cups. Linda sat at the front, gavel in hand, like a judge. When the floor opened for comments, I stood. I'd like to address unauthorized water usage. The room shifted. People leaned forward. Linda smiled politely. Please be brief. For over a month, my outdoor water line has been used to fill a private pool without my consent. I have video documentation. Her smile flickered. That's a serious claim, she said carefully. I can show the footage. She cleared her throat. This is not the appropriate forum for personal disputes. A murmur spread through the room. I pressed on. My water bill quadrupled. I was fined for locking my own faucet. Linda tapped the gavel. Enough. Someone in the back spoke up. That doesn't sound right. Linda snapped her head toward them. We'll take this offline. And just like that, the meeting moved on. But something had changed. People were watching her now. Over the next few days, neighbors started stopping me. Quiet conversations. Side glances. She did something similar to us. She fined us for parking our own car. She made us pay for tree removal that wasn't ours. Fear kept them silent, but curiosity was growing. And Linda noticed. She began escalating. First came the inspections. I received notices for improper mulch color, mailbox alignment, unapproved exterior decor, a welcome mat. Then came the fines. Small at first, then bigger. When I appealed, Linda personally denied every request. You're being difficult, she told me once, leaning across her desk. And difficult residents tend to regret it. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as just petty. She enjoyed this. Saturday afternoon. Music blasting. Dozens of people in her backyard. I watched from my window as the pool sloshed with movement. Then I noticed the hose again. This time, she didn't even bother hiding it. I walked outside, phone recording. Linda, I said calmly, disconnect my water. She laughed. You're obsessed. You're stealing. She leaned close. Prove it. That night, I emailed the HOA board members directly. All of them. With screenshots, videos, bills, receipts. No emotion. Just facts. By Monday, I had 3 replies. 2 were vague. 1 was terrified. Please stop including me on these emails. Linda handles water issues. That told me everything. The board wasn't governing. They were hostages. While reviewing old neighborhood documents online, I found something interesting. Maplewood Ridge had an outdated plumbing layout. Older homes. Shared underground utility corridors. Lines that had been modified over decades. And one note stood out. All exterior water access must comply with municipal separation standards. Separation. That word stuck with me. Linda assumed no one understood the system. She assumed no one would look. She was wrong. The city sent me a notice requesting clarification on water usage discrepancies. Someone had reported unusual consumption patterns. It wasn't me. Linda had gotten sloppy. I forwarded everything I had. And waited. For a week, nothing happened.
No fines. No emails. No HOAs.
Then one afternoon, Linda came to my door. She didn't smile.
This ends now, she said.
You withdraw your complaints. I'll forgive your violations. I looked her in the eye. Her face hardened. You have no idea what you're doing.
I do, I said.
And so does the city. She froze. Then she turned and walked away. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Because bullies don't threaten when they're winning. They threaten when they're scared. Things escalate fast. City inspectors arrive, the HOA turns on itself, Linda makes a desperate move, and a long-ignored problem beneath the neighborhood finally comes to light, continuing the purely narrative. No instructions, no how-to details. The city truck arrived on a Tuesday morning. That alone was enough to make half the neighborhood peek through their blinds. 2 inspectors stepped out wearing reflective vests, clipboards in hand. They didn't knock on Linda's door first. They knocked on mine. One of them said, polite but serious, "We're following up on a water usage anomaly tied to this address." I invited them in. I showed them everything. The bills. The footage. The journal. They didn't react emotionally. That worried me more than anger would have. Instead, one of them said, "We'll need to check the external lines." And that's when things started unraveling. Maplewood Ridge was built in phases. Old plans. Quick expansions.
Cost-cutting.
What the inspectors discovered wasn't sabotage or trickery. It was negligence. Linda's pool wasn't just connected to my faucet. It was connected to a patched-together external line that had been rerouted years ago, long before I moved in. A line that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. A line that, according to city records, should have been capped and separated. One inspector muttered, "This is a mess." The other asked me quietly, "Did the HOA ever approve modifications?" I laughed. Not because it was funny.
Because it was horrifying.
The inspectors knocked on Linda's door next. This time, the entire street watched. She came out confident, then confused, then angry. Her voice carried, "This is harassment. I run this association. You can't just dig up private property." One inspector calmly replied, "Ma'am, this isn't private anymore." That's when she noticed everyone watching. And for the first time, she looked small. That night, an emergency HOA meeting was called. Linda didn't bring her gavel. She brought a lawyer. But the board members, those same quiet, fearful people, had copies of my emails now. And city notices. And something else. Courage. One by one they spoke. About fines. Threats. Retaliation. Selective enforcement. Linda interrupted constantly. Until the lawyer leaned over and whispered something to her. She went silent. The city issued a temporary compliance order. Linda's pool had to be drained pending inspection. Seeing that massive symbol of her power reduced to cracked tile and silence felt unreal. She stood in her backyard watching it empty. I didn't feel joy. I felt relief. During the drainage process, inspectors found something else. The old external line didn't just connect to potable water. Decades ago, during a rushed expansion, multiple lines had been improperly routed too close together. Nothing dangerous had happened yet. And the HOA had ignored warnings for years. Warnings Linda personally dismissed to save costs. Now those documents were public. She came to my house one final time.
No clipboard. No smile.
"If you withdraw," she said quietly, "I'll resign quietly."
No lawsuits.
I shook my head. This isn't about me anymore. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You think you won. No, I said. I think everyone else finally did. Within weeks, Linda was removed as HOA president. The board was restructured. An external audit was ordered. The city imposed fines on the HOA, not residents. Linda sold her house 3 months later. No farewell party, no goodbye email, just a for sale sign and an empty driveway. Things changed. Rules became reasonable. Meetings became discussions. People smiled for real. And my water bill? Lower than it had ever been. Sometimes, when I water my lawn now, I see neighbors wave. Not fearfully, but gratefully. If Linda believed resigning would make everything disappear, she underestimated how much damage she'd left behind. The city audit didn't just look at her house. 2 weeks after Linda stepped down, orange flags appeared across Maplewood Ridge. Front lawns, side yards, even the perfect areas Linda used to brag about. Inspectors walked the neighborhood with maps older than most residents' mortgages. Clipboards thick with paperwork. People started asking questions. And for the first time, the HOA didn't shut them down. The city required a public disclosure meeting.
Not HOA only. Not board only.
Everyone. The community center filled beyond capacity. Some people stood along the walls. Others listened from the hallway. A city engineer stepped up to the microphone. "This isn't about assigning blame," he said. That was a lie, but a polite one. The presentation was brutal. Improper utility modifications dating back 20 years, unauthorized rerouting approved by HOA leadership, ignored warnings from contractors, selective enforcement, masking infrastructure neglect. Linda's name appeared again and again. Approval signatures, email chains, budget decisions. Each slide felt heavier than the last. People murmured. Someone whispered, "She fined me for my mailbox." Another said, "She threatened to put a lien on my house." The contrast was staggering. Then came the slide. A diagram of underground lines. Water. Drainage. Waste. Too close. Too careless. The engineer paused. Under certain conditions, he said slowly, cross-contamination would have been possible. The room went silent.
No panic. No shouting.
Just the collective realization that Linda's obsession with control had nearly put people at risk. All to save money. All to maintain power. Someone asked, "Is Linda here?" She wasn't. She'd declined to attend. Her lawyer had advised her to stay away. That spoke louder than any defense she could have made. The city mandated full infrastructure corrections, independent HOA oversight for 5 years, financial restitution for affected homeowners. The HOA's reserves were drained. Special assessments were issued, but this time, transparently.
No surprise fines. No intimidation.
And strangely enough,
People didn't complain.
they finally understood what they were paying for. Linda's name became shorthand. Don't pull a Linda. That's how Linda used to do it. New residents were told the story within weeks of moving in. Not as gossip, as a warning. Months later, a local news outlet ran a story. They interviewed residents.
One of them was me.
I didn't name Linda.
I didn't need to.
The truth had already done that. One evening, as repairs finished and lawns were restored, I stood outside watching the sunset. A neighbor approached. "You know," he said, "you could have just moved." Linda's quiet consequences, the long-term effects on the neighborhood, and the lesson everyone learned about power, silence, and standing your ground here is the final part of the fictional story. No instructions, no how to, just narrative closure. Time doesn't erase damage, but it does reveal what was real all along. Linda Haversham didn't disappear dramatically. There was no courtroom spectacle, no shouting match on the evening news, no final speech. She sold her house below market value. The listing photos showed the pool drained, empty, and cracked, like a monument to a reign that had ended badly. The buyer was from out of town. No one warned them directly, but the story found its way to them anyway. It always does. Linda moved into a town without an HOA. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. People expected her to sue. She didn't. Her lawyer advised against it. Too much documentation. Too many witnesses. Too many signatures with her name on them. Sometimes the strongest legal move is silence. And Linda, who had never been quiet a day in her life, finally was. The HOA didn't dissolve. Instead, it transformed. Rules were rewritten. Fines were capped. All enforcement required multiple approvals. Meetings stopped being performances and became conversations. People disagreed openly without fear. Children chalked driveways again. Gardens became colorful. Mailboxes leaned a little crooked. And no one cared. Years later, when new residents asked why the HOA was so relaxed, someone would inevitably say, "You should have seen it before." And then the story would come out. Not exaggerated. Not dramatized. Just facts. A woman with too much power. A system that enabled her. And one resident who refused to stay quiet. I learned something important in Maplewood Ridge. Power doesn't come from authority. It comes from silence. Linda didn't win because she was strong. She won because everyone else was tired, afraid, busy, convinced it wasn't worth the fight. Until it was. One afternoon, years later, I stood in my yard watering the lawn.
No clipboard. No notices.
No hose where it didn't belong. A neighbor walked by and joked, "Careful, you're using water." I laughed. "Approved hours?" I asked. "Anytime you want," he said. And that was it.